Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of the show. I'm Strategy Director at Mini-MBA Marketing. Paul Bailey is my guest today. He's been working with global businesses and fast scaling startups on brand stuff. He's a brand guy, a brand strategist, and he's been working on diagnosis, strategy, and realization for years, helping improve experience, empowering culture, and achieving business objectives for his clients. I had an absolute ball talking to Paul. Really, really fascinating. Love the way he thinks. And I really enjoyed this discussion. So I'm going to shut up and we'll just get straight into it. Enjoy. Paul Bailey, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
I would say that to listen. And what I mean by that is that I think in terms of working as a strategist and a brand strategist, I think that we often talk about lots of things like insights and all that sort of stuff. I think that the one thing that isn't really talked about enough is listening. And I think it's the number one skill for a strategist that's required is the ability to listen and to keep listening. And quite a few years ago now, I was in a meeting with somebody, and they were like a coach, and they used the term active listening, and I was like, oh god, another buzzword. Oh, there we go. But I listened to I listened to what they were saying, and the definition of active listening, the ability to listen and then act on key things that you pick up on, that is at the core of what a strategist should be good at. It's listening, but then picking up on the key things, and I think it's just a skill that is massively underplayed and underrated.
So, do you think a lot of strategists come in almost with the answer before they've listened enough, synthesized, and kind of picked out the key points? Do you think they sort of come in and go, oh, well, we're the strategy team, so we know what we're doing here?
Yeah, exactly. That I think that's a big problem in strategy, is that too many strategists think they're the cleverest person in the room, and too many
Amen.
strategists think that their voice should be heard. That it's not about your voice. It's when I do brand strategy, it's about listening to what the client says, listening to what the audience of that client is saying, listening to as many voices as possible. And that's not just listening, it's actually researching what's going on in the market or whatever, and then just picking out the nuggets, the interesting bits, and then you play it back to the client. I think too many, and you play it back to them in a kind of a collaborative way. Too many strategists, to me, think that they've solved the problem. They're going, and this is another thing that pisses me off. It's this like big reveal. It's like, we're going to do this big reveal to the client. It's going to be amazing, and and it's like, oh my god, like. Do we? Is that how we should interact with the client, or should it be a lot more collaborative and like step by step, rather than this like big reveal of like, we've solved your problem, here you are, blah, blah, blah. And then I suppose, to beyond that, it's the point of, or maybe we can talk about this later, but the strategy, for me, strategy is pointless without being executed. Like it's what's the point of a strategy if it's just going to sit there in a PDF on someone's computer? So this idea of like, oh, I've created this amazing deck, here you go, and then we'll see you later. It's like, what's that? That's pointless. So yeah, I can't remember what the first question was, but yeah.
Hey, well, listen, we're in a safe space where we're getting our gripes out about other strategists. Well, including, do you know what? I'm guilty of all these things as well. I would love to say previously I've been guilty of all these things, and I've learned sometimes the hard way. So Tom Critchlow, who was on 2 or 3 series ago, referred to something he picked up from the Helsinki Design Labs called strategy and stewardship. So it kind of takes down that barrier that, if strategy and execution or delivery or implementation or whatever you want to call it always feels like you're throwing something over the hedge and then
Yeah.
someone else has to run with it. Whereas if you call it strategy and stewardship, it connects you to that delivery element, and you've got to be there. So I've tried to use that as much as I can. And my other gripe, as I said, this is a safe space, is strategists who believe their job is to predict the future. And God bless people who can predict the future. I just haven't yet met anybody who can.
No.
Now, I could probably predict the future really accurately for 10 seconds time. Less accurately for 10 minutes, but still okay. But 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 years? No, I'm sorry. I'm just making it up now. And people, so, will this plan work? I was like, someone's just predicted the future for you. Do you think it's going to work? But there's this sort of arrogance of strategy, isn't there? And it's like, oh, this is what's going to happen. If you do these 4 things, these 2 things will happen.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. You sort of touch on that, is because I put a LinkedIn post up a couple of days ago about saying how I think too many strategists have this belief in this cause and effect. It's like, if I do X, then Y is going to happen. The thing is, the reality is that the vast majority of the time, if you do X, Y isn't going to happen, because Z comes in and smashes your plans up within about 2 seconds. So I think that, I think you know JP Castlin quite well.
Yes, yeah. Previously of this parish as well. He was season 2, I think.
Excellent. But his approach and his thinking on like adaptive strategy and stuff like that, I think is amazing. And it's like, I've talked a bit about sort of brand strategy and like adaptive brand strategy and stuff like that, but I think his work on adaptive strategy and stuff like that, it's just a much more real world approach to strategy than like, if I do X, Y will happen. It's crazy.
And if you'd have told me as a marketing strategist 10 years ago that the strategist I would be quoting most in my working life would be Mike Tyson, then nobody would have predicted that as a future for me. But I find Tyson's famous, well, I believe it was Tyson anyways, famous quote about everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It is a great way of just highlighting what JP called, the adaptive strategy approach, is that we can have this great strategic approach, but at some point, one of your competitors is going to punch us in the mouth. Are we going to be ready? And that, to go back to your previous point, that's why it can't be strategy and execution throwing stuff over the hedge. Because if you're the strategist and you're supposed to be the one helping to steer the ship, you need to be there when you get punched in the mouth to help course correct. And if you've just thrown it over the hedge and come back a year later and go, that's not what we said.
Yeah.
Then you're not helping them. You're not helping. And the ultimate job of what we do, I believe, is to help our clients.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So if we're not helping them, then what are we doing? So,
well, that's it. And I talk about strategy as that really what we're trying to do is help our clients win better within the context within which their brand exists. And by context, I mean the landscape within which their brand exists. So that might be the competitive set, it might be the audience, it might be the market forces at play. The thing is that context is like ever shifting. And I'm not saying that it's shifting like massively, but it's always moving, always, because the competitors are always doing something. Audience behavior changes a little bit. So I think as strategists, it's not enough for us to say, there you go, there's your strategy, off you go run with it, because the context is going to evolve over time, and you need to be there to say, okay, right, now we need to sort of change direction a little bit or something like that. I think that for me is what has changed a bit in terms of the more planning side of strategy. It's not as like, I think maybe in the old days of like advertising in the 60s and stuff like that, you could be an ad strategist and then set a plan and for the next year or 2 years or 3 years, and then roll it out, because it's not really changing that quickly, the context, the landscape. But we're in a time now, and I think the advent of the internet has massively sped up everything, and it's just meant that things change much quicker.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I pull my hair out sometimes when people tell me marketing and everything is changing faster than at any point before. But because I point to the Industrial Revolution when things change very quickly. But in that end of, as you talk about, the sort of the communications end of marketing, it's hard to think of a time when anything has changed faster than now, isn't it?
Yeah.
There was the advent of radio and TV at one point within what 20, 30 years of each other. Now it feels like we have that sort of advent every 3 months. Something comes
Yeah.
around and you're like, all right, okay. So
Well,
certainly in the comms and you're like, whoa, this is
yeah,
incredible.
and that's it. I mean, I'm a big advocate that marketing is way more than comms, it's far more than advertising. But in terms of the communications of marketing and the channels through which people communicate and stuff, you know, the, I think we're still at the early stages of what can be done with the internet. The internet it's hugely shifted the power dynamics. I think maybe like the fact that the creators, or creators like YouTubers and stuff like that, the fact that they are now such huge brands, and it's and I know that there's obviously like barriers to entry still, but I think that the barriers to entry to becoming a YouTuber is a lot lower than the barrier to entry to, like, starting up being like a soft drinks manufacturer or something like that.
Yeah.
I think obviously there's still a lot of things at play that are still the same, because I know I just said, like, communication has changed a lot, but but most things do stay the same. Most things are the same for marketing through the years. I use so many models and so many things. Like I still use the 4Ps. I still use STP. I still use all that stuff because I think it's still relevant. I still use the marketing sales funnel because it's still relevant. But yeah, I think that in terms of communication, I think that the internet has really changed things massively.
Well, let's keep going about what you've just mentioned, STP, segmentation, targeting, positioning, because you wrote a piece in the Branding Strategy Insider website about the importance of being audience first when you come into brand work. Why did you put that piece together initially?
Um, it was a few. Well, I suppose because I've been working with clients a long time now, and in my experience, way too many clients and too many businesses are product focused. So the two ways you can orientate your business according, like, to in terms of like marketing theory. There's product orientation, there's market orientation. So it's like, do you shape your business around a product and then try to find an audience to sell that product to, or do you look at the market, what's going on, what the audience are doing, what they're wanting, and then create a product in order to appeal to them? I think far too many businesses are product focused or product oriented. I think that a lot of businesses could do better by being more market oriented. But then I was looking at the YouTubers, like the creators. Again, I come back to creators. I'm not, I'm not like a big like fan of creators or anything like that. But I think because basically the creators, what they brands are for are to build an audience. They're not selling product, or the product they're selling is themselves, basically, and they're creating content in order to sell, like, just make themselves famous. Really, that's, you talk to any kid, well, not any kid, but you talk to so many kids these days, and like, what do you want to be? And if it was when I was at school or whatever, I wanted to be a footballer, or I wanted to be like a movie star, or I wanted to be. Well, I didn't, but but I wanted to be.
Yeah.
You know, kids want to be
There's still a
whatever.
rugby league ball up there because that's what I wanted to be when I was a kid.
There you go. But you talk to kids now, and what being famous was a byproduct of what you wanted to be. So you didn't want to be necessarily famous. You wanted to be a footballer or a rugby player or whatever. You talk to kids now, and they want to be famous. They don't want to be a footballer. They want to be famous. They want to be a YouTuber. And this is an interesting flip in the and again, coming back to the internet, I think that was because they're now given the opportunity to create content, to build an audience, etc. I think that what they're doing is they are building, or some YouTubers are building huge audiences and hugely like not. I wanted to say the word loyal audience, but I don't mean loyal. But you know what I mean. They're very involved
Passionate.
audiences.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think that what brands are doing now is they're actually realizing, hold on a minute, there is something to this, like audience orientation, or you know, I'd sort of align it with market orientation, but I think market orientation is much more about what's the market forces at play, etc. I think audience orientation takes it to its absolute zenith point, which is it's all about building the audience. Once we've built the audience, then we can say, right, okay, we've got this audience, and this audience, well, what do they like to buy? Right, and we'll create this product or this product or this product.
So are you thinking of sort of the was it KSI who was behind Prime, or was that somebody else who was behind Prime?
Yeah, so I wrote an article. I wrote an article for Marketing Week, I believe, or might have been the Drum, one of them. I wrote an article about.
Let's hope the editors aren't listening.
Yeah, about Logan Paul and KSI's Prime. It was because basically last year, well, when that product came out, it went crazy, went through the roof. The demand was so sky high. I mean, I think the demand was partly because of the lack of supply, and that's what just they kind
like a
of
luxury product.
Yeah, they kind of accidentally launched like a luxury product, but I don't think they meant it, but it just happened. But then I wrote an article for Marketing Week because their demand just crashed basically. But when I was writing that article, that was when I was looking into all of these creators, and the one who's obviously is the highest or the largest most famous one is Mr. Beast now, who's massive. And actually, interestingly, KSI, Logan Paul, and Mr. Beast have brought out a new product called Lunchables, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is like this lunch. It's like a packed lunch for kids to go to school, but it's like terrible food. So I wrote something for the Drum about that, complaining about how YouTubers should not be the people who feed your kids.
But is there anything fundamentally different though between, say, this, even though it's digital channels and it's maybe individuals building that brand? Is it overly different to say what Michelin did with a guide 125 years ago or whatever, or John Deere with their sort of content, the first bits of content marketing, producing magazines, or Sears creating radio stations to build an audience to sell a product?
No, I think it's very, very similar, but it's the fact that it's individuals doing it and not large companies doing it, which I think is really interesting.
Which could be down to that reduced barriers to entry that
Yeah,
digital channels have brought, or it could be a shift in how the landscape looks. I'm not sure which of those two things I think it is, but I'd be interested. Do you think it's a fundamental shift?
I think it's it's not a shift because there is still room for companies to do it as well, and there are companies who do it well. Um, but it's like an additional like way of like hitting people, because there's ways. Like, I think the Michelin star uh, eat, sort of idea was an amazing idea, and it's still going now, obviously.
Yeah, one I
But
wish I'd have thought up.
yeah, I know it's fantastic, but it's but yeah, the fact that the creators are this a whole other sort of stream of activity, and I think now in the last couple of years, large brands are like trying to piggyback off them or to use them.
Mhm.
And I think the really interesting place now is about not these like huge creators who've got massive reach like a Mr. Beast, but it's about the micro influencers, that those sort of people who might have 5,000 followers, but they've got 5,000 followers who all love dogs, and and then
Yep.
a pet food would be like pet food brands like, all right, okay, I'm going to work with that micro influencer and stuff like that. I actually think that the days of large scale social media are kind of over. But I think that now it's all about these micro groups. I mean, WhatsApp's a great example of like a channel, a channel that is booming because of like it creates that ability to create little groups of people.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the things that has maybe already happened in social, but the cycle is going to repeat itself again. So years ago, when social first, Facebook was growing in popularity. I worked with a number of beer brands in Ireland, so Tennent's, Budweiser, Corona, Beck's, a couple of others anyway. And the biggest thing that the brands were struggling with at the time was losing control. So up until social media, broadly, they controlled their message. When they put advertising out, they controlled the message. They picked, they might not have been picking exactly every billboard it went on, but they picked radio stations, they picked billboards in certain areas, TV channels at certain times, across certain things, sponsored certain things. It was, we control this, we distribute that. And trying to get them to loosen those shackles to understand that actually you're gonna this is gonna be coming from the ground up. People are gonna be talking about your brand, and sometimes they're gonna say that your drink tastes like piss, and you've just got to accept that and move on for the people and be there for the people who like your drink. Not worry about those. It almost feels like the next iteration of that is what you're talking about, because they're gonna have to lose control again a little bit more, because it's easy when we're working with these four influencers who are going to help us reach all these people, and we're doing this push on our social media. Yeah, we're monitoring, we're listening about what people are saying, but actually moving into that world of working with 3, 4, 500 different groups of 5, 10, 15,000 people is going to be impossible to control. You're going to have to fan the flames and set the direction and kind of watch what happens, which to brands who are often, despite what many of them proclaim, most brands are quite risk averse. And that sounds quite a risky approach, doesn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
And there'll be challenger brands, there'll be another Liquid Death or another somebody else who'll come on and do something a bit way a bit out there, and they'll win it, and everyone's like, how do we do that? And then they look and work out how they actually need to do it, and then go, no, we don't. I don't fancy that, and they'll roll back from it. And it just feels like, but that feels like maybe that's what the next curve's going to be.
No, I completely agree. I think and to your point about the control thing, it is like up until the internet, up until social media channels started to take off, brands had pretty much full control over the messages that were being delivered. So, you know, bra- when I say brand, I think a brand is made up of two things. It's made up of identity and meaning. That that's its simplest form. So a brand is how is the brand recognized? How is it identified? And then once it's identified, what does that mean to people?
Mm-hmm.
And when I say meaning, I mean what does it mean to the audience? What does it mean to people? Not what does it mean to the CEO or whatever. What
Yeah.
does it mean to people? I think that businesses were able to control the meaning because they were controlling all the communication. I think that you're entirely right that when social media came out and things like that. Now, sorry, I'll just rewind a little bit. Businesses didn't control all of the meaning because if you think about a brand, all right, let's just use Nike as an example. Okay, if I'm Nike, if I'm a Nike buyer, I've bought a pair of Nike trainers, and I think my Nike trainers haven't performed that well, or they've fallen apart, or something like that. Right? I will probably tell my mates who I see in person. This is before social media. I'll tell my mates in person who I see that my Nike trainers have fallen apart. Okay, right. So that message that the Nike trainers have fallen apart hasn't spread very far. It's geographically limited. It's limited in
Yeah.
terms of time and stuff like that. If I'm on social media and I put a post up saying my Nike trainers have fallen apart and it gets traction and it spreads, it can spread, that message can spread far and wide across the world, through time zones, through geographically. It's a huge, it's just been blown up in any to any sort of scale, like to a massive scale. I think that was the big shift, and that you're talking about. It wasn't that people didn't say negative things or positive things about brands before. It's just they didn't have a megaphone, and now we've got a megaphone. So yeah, it's taken brands time to get to grips with that, but I totally agree. I think now it's the next stage. It's like how, like, these smaller groups of maybe more geographically specific people, but maybe there might be a small group of people, but who are spread disparately across the world. We don't know. But I think that they are going to be even harder to control in terms of the messaging. I think the brands who will do it well are, and I think this is a key point about brand. I think there are brands who have a really, really locked down, this is what we mean, and this is how it's going to be rolled out. I think a better way of doing that is saying, look, this is what we mean, but how it might be rolled out is through 1,000 different ways. And how you can start to bring that to life is by actually. So when you're working with a brand and you're defining, like, what's the meaning and what are we about and how do we do things and etc. I find it very useful to define what we're not as a brand. So it's not what we are, not like exactly what we want to be known for, but it's like, okay, what aren't we? What do we fight against as a brand? Because if you define what you fight against, then everything else, like, then the opposite of that is, that's fine. So I think that brands need to be looser. They need to be more
Mm-hmm.
fluid, need to be more dynamic, because a brand is a dynamic entity. I think they need to not be so, like, locked down and like, no, this is the thing we have to say all the time, because it just doesn't work like that.
And do you think I loved that when I read it in preparation for this, about you saying how you define what you're not, or what you're against? Do you find that can sometimes help challenger brands as well, sort of have their focus almost of, right, we're not that, so it kind of gives them that position of, well being the anti something, which is that what brands do? Do some brands get a kick out of that because it gives them something to chase down?
You know what? I think people really like this approach because it's it's sometimes easier to decide what you're against than to decide what you're for. And why that probably is that as a brand, you probably are for quite a few things, you know. And so what I find with clients sometimes is like they, you know, they might say, "Oh, we're all about this, and we're all about this, and we're all about this," but they can't decide which one to to stick their to stick their stake in the ground to. So then when they're doing communications, they're trying to give like 5 or 6 messages every time. And you're like, no, don't do that. Like it's easier to say, okay, what are we not? What are we against? What and we've done this with like a leading public school in the UK. We've done this with a strategy firm based in Milan, and we helped them define, well, what are you against? And they found it so much easier to decide what they're against. And then it was like, okay, well, if we're against that, then all of these things that we're for, but we know what we're against. So I think you used the word focus. I think that's an important thing for brand. It's you need focus, but you don't need like a focus like that. You need you don't need a really laser focus. You need a much wider focus. But in order to get a wider focus, one way of doing that is by deciding what is outside the brand, and then the opposite is what's inside the brand.
So it's not just focusing on maybe one thing, but it's not focusing on 10 things as well. It's finding that sweet spot in between.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it sounds almost that you've perhaps used some a killer insight from some research with a firm to come up with this approach that you only need these few things. So I'm segueing terribly, but I want to talk about insight and its role in brand strategy or strategy generally, because there's been a lot of chatter within the marketing world recently. Andrew Tyndall's talked about it. James Herman, who was on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, and you've been talking about this for a while as well. So the role of insight in creating sort of brand strategy and great advertising has been, you know, it's got a vaulted place in history, isn't it? You've got this killer insight, you make the great thing. I was asking someone about questions I should ask you, and one of the questions they sent me was ask him about what's the most unusual insight that he's ever come across. Insight is the thing that everybody wants to know about because it's what helps you create great advertising, isn't it?
I'm not a fan of insights. Right. I think I've had in all my years doing brand strategy, I think I've had one insight.
Or one in only 20 plus years,
25 plus years. I think it's less about insights. It's more about the term being very overused, and it's come to mean a myriad of different things. I think if you said to any sort of strategist or brand strategist or marketer, define the word insight for me, I think you ask 100 strategists, you'd get 100 different answers. I mean, they'll all be kind of similar, but they'll be different answers. To be honest, you ask a strategist to define strategy and you'll get 100 different answers. But so I don't like to use the word insights. I struggle to find, well, when's it an observation? When's it an insight? You know, whatever. I like to talk about being insightful. Like, I think you can be insightful. You can be insightful, but that doesn't mean it's an insight. It's like we've just put. It's another example of strategists putting strategy as like the end point. It's like, we've come up with this insight. That's it. We've solved everything now. It's like, no, you haven't. It's a process. It's like creativity. Creativity is a process. Strategy is a process. It's just a process. There isn't an end point. So saying like we've got this great insight and that's it, we've solved everything, it's not that insight is the problem. It's what the term insight has come to mean for lots of people and what it then sort of negates. So no, I'm not a huge insight fan, sorry.
I think so. The point Andrew Tyndall was making was that you see a lot of people in the Effie Awards have filled in the insight box, but it's not really insight that's going in there. So to the point that you're making, and I think you hear a lot of people talking about the word truth when, what's the truth or what's the insight that we're solving. And I suppose I think maybe there's an element of this that I quite like, because to me, if you're going to talk about insight in a broad way, I know we haven't defined what it actually means, but it always seems to me to be the bit that maybe makes people drive it back to the audience. But not always. Sometimes the insight is in the product, and you're like, really. But it always seems to be the bit that makes me, when people talk about insight, they always want to talk about the human insight or the human truth. And you go, so what's this thing going to do for this group of people that's going to make them do the thing we want them to do, buy our product? So I've never been anti-insight, because to me it was always the bit that at least made people stop thinking about the product and start thinking about the person who's going to use it.
Yeah.
What role is this going to solve? So I was always quite positive about it, but the stuff I've been reading in the last couple of weeks and talking to you about it does make me think, oh, maybe there is a wider problem here, rather than it, just being like, yeah, insight's great. Actually, maybe there is a wider problem.
I don't think that insight's a problem. I think it's what insight has come to mean is the problem. Yeah. And actually, to your point there, I think I agree. I think anything that helps people shift their focus to the audience away from the product is a brilliant thing. At Halo, we try to come up with insightful approaches to our audience. In like we're looking for interesting things that our audience might be doing. Like not our audience, but our clients' audiences. Are our clients' audiences, are they behaving a certain way? What's the category behavior like? Is there any trends happening in the category? Our focus as a studio is very much on our clients' audiences. Like what are they doing? Why are they doing it? All that sort of stuff. And yeah, we might come out with stuff that some people would call an insight, but I don't call them insights, because I don't revere them like they're this big thing. But I do agree that as strategists, as marketers, we are supposed to be the voice of the audience. We're supposed to bring that. If there is an insight to be had, it's bringing that sort of that behavior, that knowledge, that audience truth into our work, because that's at its simplest form, that is what strategy is all about. I always say that good strategy is about encouraging people to think, feel, or do something. That's it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage people, not make people. We're trying to encourage people to think something, to feel something, or to do something. And that's it.
And you've talked about previously as well about associated memorable moments as well, which is about also trying to keep that audience and the customer front and center. So what do you mean by associated memorable moments? And does it ever get abbreviated to
It does get abbreviated to AM, but I never say it like that.
Good.
Associated memorable moments, in its shortest version, it really, what it is, well, I'll break it down into its three parts. By associated, I mean two things. I mean that, like I was saying earlier with brand, a brand is about identity and meaning. The first role of a brand is to be identified. Okay, so if you're creating a moment for your brand, people have to see it and then associate it with the other moments of your brand, or the branded elements. I think that's one thing that people fall down a lot is that they might do a great advert. I mean, I can't remember the statistic now, but something like 1 in 5 ads, like only 1 in 5 ads can be recognized like a day later, like by who the advert's for.
Yeah.
So you can produce the greatest advert in the world, but if after it people's memories like, well, it was a great advert, but I don't know who it was for. Well, what's the point of the advert then? It's pointless. So associated means they have to associate that moment with your brand, and also it has to be a brand that your audience want to be associated with. So that's what the first word means. It means identification, recognition, and the want to be associated with it. Memorable means simply that. It's in terms of that. If you are about meaning, if you want your brand to mean something, people have to remember it. I think the strategist Farish wrote a book about attention, and people talk a lot about the attention economy. Attention's great. Getting attention's very important. But if you get people's attention and then they don't remember what you're telling them, it's all pointless again. So you have to be memorable. So it's associated, memorable, and moments it's an attempt to shift the thinking away from touch points. So I know, when we're talking about marketing, we talk about brand, we talk about the touch points of a brand. So whether that's a website or a product or even like a staff member, like in a shop or whatever, we always talk about the touch points. And my thinking is that actually that the touch points are fine. The things that are being designed are good, but that's not what matters. What matters is the experience people have with those things. It's the moment people come into contact with the touch point, that's what matters. It's what that touch point is encouraging people to think, feel, or do. That's what matters. So that's why I use this associated memorable moments. Moments is an attempt to just reposition the thinking from a very business-oriented approach of like touch points and these are the things we've created, to these are the moments that people experience the things.
Yeah. So again, it's just, as you say, customer centric all the
Yeah.
time. And I do wonder, I talk about talking to your customers is the drum I bang on, and actually hearing from the people who buy your product firsthand. And I do wonder how we got to a stage where marketing, I mean, the clue's right there in market. We're about the whole discipline generally is about the market. How did we get to a place where brand strategists talking about having to change language to make people realize they've got to orientate towards the customer, and marketing strategists saying, why do only 3% of e-commerce professionals ever have a conversation with customers? How did we get to a place where people in our discipline don't think about their customer first? How did we get here?
You know how I think
what mess have we made?
You know how I think we got here, and this might be a bit controversial, but it's a lack of training. I think people in marketing, I don't think enough people in marketing are trained in marketing. And I'm not saying you have to do a marketing degree or anything like that. I haven't done a marketing degree. I mean, I did a brand masters and things like that. And I have actually done Mark Ritson's Mini-MBA in marketing.
Yeah, big fan of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But I think what Mark always talks about is the fact that such a small percentage of people working in marketing have any training at all in marketing. It's being like the idea of market orientation, orientating your business to the market and your audience rather than just your products. I think that is old thinking. It should be like commonly known across. But I speak to marketers sometimes, and they don't even know the concept of market orientation. I think it's crazy.
Listen, there's nothing controversial about that opinion here, Paul. I absolutely, I believe you. But we almost celebrate it sometimes, don't we, in the industry?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, I don't have any marketing training.
I
It's
think that's the crazy thing. The
mhm,
crazy thing isn't that people don't have any training. The crazy thing is that they think that is a good thing.
yeah,
That's insane.
terrible. Well, look, time wise is pushing us towards the top of the hour, so I want to ask you two more questions, and one of them. I've left it far too late to get into this properly, but there is one thorny issue when it comes to segmentation and targeting that we disagree on. Now we have a
Oh, okay.
fundamental disagree on,
Wow.
and a disagreement. Sorry, that is naming your target customer personas. You wrote. Let me read this out. And if you give them catchy names or titles, please stop. Was what you wrote. Now you are talking to the High Lord and Master of giving targets funny names. So explain yourself, Paul. Why do you not like it? And then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
Right. Okay. So why I don't like it? Well, okay. I'm not a fan really of audience personas. And why I say that is well, I should say more accurately, I'm not a fan of bad audience personas. But the reason I'm saying I'm not a fan of audience personas is most audience personas that I've read are bad.
Yes.
And I think that what a lot of people do, and this is a lot of marketers or strategists or something, they sort of they write these personas based on no empirical evidence at all. And so what that does is it kind of creates this very, very fluffy persona, but it's not actionable. It's like, okay, that's that persona, right? How large is that target audience? How many people are in it? How are you going to reach those people? What channels are they active on? All that sort of stuff. It's like, I don't know.
My
And
favorite, sorry to interrupt, Paul. I don't know if you've ever, some people download a HubSpot template or other templates are available. They're all equally awful. And they'll have like these little sliders and it'll be like thinking, feeling. And there'll be like 10 marks along the box. And it'll be like, number 4 for thinking versus feeling and intuition versus, or introvert versus extrovert, number 7. And you're like, that's lovely. One, what's that based on? And two, what do you do with that information?
yeah.
If it was a number 5 for feeling versus thinking, how would that change anything we're going to do?
I think, and that's my key point. My key point is, you know, knowing your audience is key, but being able to take an action to appeal to that audience, that's the whole point of knowing who your audience is. So it's all fine and well, like creating an audience persona. I mean, I have read some great audience personas because underneath the well-written copy, there is information. There is like, well, not necessarily statistics, but there is it's based on something real. Most of them aren't based on something real, and I have to say that I find the worst ones out there are actually the ones that have some very fancy titles.
So, look, I'm not going to disagree with anything that you've said there because I agree with everything you've said. So my point on creating personas, I generally think is relatively important for most organizations. But when I've worked in B2B, I've found it most useful. And I don't do a huge amount of B2B anymore, maybe only sort of 15-20%. But what I found in B2B where the groupings are narrower, the segmentation smaller, therefore the
Yeah.
tag and the targeting tends to be better. It's easier to build it off data. It tends to be that it becomes really, really useful. The customers for whatever the product is tend to fall into, there's maybe kind of 3 to 5 key groupings. Whereas if you're talking about a consumer product, it can get very big and very messy very quickly. But in the B2B world, so you've got these sort of 3 to 5 type personas that actually do people recognize people in there. And we've got what information have we got for them on the website? What webinars do we want to drive them to? All that sort of stuff there, actions we want them to take. But the end of that exercise, I always like to give them a name. And the reason I do that is I went back to an organization I worked with once years ago. I went back about 2 years later and I overheard a sales call where somebody put the call on hold and went, "Can you pass us the information for Discount Dave?" And that was the name of the guy we gave to them. But it was the persona who, straight away, you knew it was the guy who was always haggling for a discount, wanted this, wanted that, wanted extras thrown in. And he was getting the information that he was being sent so he could email it, to kind of the proof of value rather than doing the discount. And in that moment, I was like, these names become part of the language of the organization, and that's why I still do them. But it's very much, it's the end of the journey, not the beginning. Where,
and I will say, I do agree with that. I will say, and this is actually opening up a whole new discussion that we haven't got time for. But I think that the one key audience of your brand, particularly in B2B, is the internal audience, and that if you can create tools, and whether that's a tool, whether that's like a language, like we at Halo, we have our own lexicon, so it's like what sort of language do we use and stuff like that. If you can create that, then you're building the brand from the inside out. So it's a very effective way of doing it. I do agree with you.
Excellent. Well, look, we've not got into a fist fight right at the end of the podcast, which is brilliant. So look, just very quickly before you go, Paul, do you have any recommendations for listeners? Anything that they should read or listen to or get into other than your work, which is obviously in the show notes as well?
Yeah, so I've got a few books that I think are very, very important. When I was doing my master's in brand, I read a lot, and one thing I read was it was I did it when co-creation was getting was really, really popular. So there's a book called The Power of Co-Creation by Ramaswamy and Gouliart. And it's a fantastic book about how brands are co-created. And like touching on points that we've talked about today, this sort of power shift and the value creation, like with people moving from consumer into like value creator. They're not just consuming value, they're actually creating value. I think that's a really good book. I think another book I read by Adam Arvidsson, who's a professor, I can't remember what university he's at, but he's a professor in he was a professor in brand, brands, meaning and value in media culture. It's a brilliant book on brand and meaning. And then I think in terms of people, I read a book called Beyond Culture by E. Hall, which is a great book about about culture not being human nature, but being taught about nurture rather than nature. And then the last one, I'm sure people know, it's How Not to Plan by Les Binet and Sarah Carter on marketing. I think that's such a fantastic book because it's, some of the other books I've mentioned are quite deep and they're quite academic and that. How Not to Plan, it's such a great sort of, not entry level, but it's a brilliant book on the marketing process.
So what I love about this question is there are 4 books there you mentioned that I've never read, and only one of them I've ever heard of, which was the How Not to Plan. So it's a great resource of just picking other people's brains and finding out where to go next. So thank you very much for that. I'll have a dip through them. I've still got a stack of books. I mean, most of those are unread. They're only there for the way they look. I'm working my way through most of them. But yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Paul. It's been brilliant.
No problem.
Oh, well, look, all Paul's details are in the show notes. I'd urge you to go and follow him on LinkedIn, read some of the stuff that's in the show notes as well to sort of unpick how Paul thinks, because as you found today, it's absolutely superb. So thank you very much for your time, Paul.
Thanks a lot, mate. Take care.